Welcome to Train Signal. You're watching a lesson on configuring remote desktop services client connections. Now, this is the lesson in which I am going to show you some of the stuff that I have mentioned in each of the last few lessons. As we were going through each of the last few lessons which had to do with remote desktop services, in each one we'd come across certain client connections, and I had to keep making reference to, well, I'll show you this in more detail when we get to the actual client settings. I'll show you this one in more detail when we get to the actual client settings. Well, this is the lesson where I'm going to go ahead and, well, first of all, show you how to configure remote desktop services client settings, which again is primarily what I kept making reference to in each of the last few lessons. But then I'll also show you how to configure the user configuration for remote desktop services. So we'll go in and see how we don't just set settings in the remote desktop client utility, but also on individual users if we see the need to do so. And then I'll go in and show you how we can manage remote desktop services user connections on the remote desktop session host. So as I said, we're just going to jump right in and get right to it and see how all this stuff works. So let's jump over now. Alright, so here we are on our Windows 7 client. This is the same Windows 7 client that we've used in each of the last few lessons, the one that we've been using to make connections to our remote desktop services session host. There is one change that I've made to this client since the last time we were here. The last time we were on this client, I was demonstrating the remote desktop gateway, and in order to do so, we had to put this client out on a separate subnet so as to emulate that it was outside of the corporate network. Well, what I've done is I've brought everything back. Okay, I brought everything back to the 192.168.10 network, which here in my office, that's the network that I've been using for the Global Mantix network. Okay, so our domain controller, the VMM server, the member servers, they're all on the 10 network. And just to show you, now go ahead and click Start, open up a command prompt, and type ipconfig, and sure enough, you can see I'm on 192.168.10 network. Now, if you have been following along in the previous lessons, and if you are following along in this lesson, you may need to take a moment to pause the lesson and make that change on your end as well. Okay, now why did I do this? I mean, we could have kept using the gateway. I just don't want us to